Ladies and gentlemen, it is Saturday, it's Scotland, and it is once again coming to you live from the AFFG Nerve Centre here in the great British city of Glasgow. It is once again our Saturday street stall. Now, this is the third Saturday in a row that we've done our Saturday street stall. And we're doing it here from our office. We're doing it live on Twitter from this camera. And we're doing it live on Facebook from this camera. And we're doing it here because obviously we can't be out on the streets. This Saturday last year was also a lovely sunny day here in Glasgow, and we were out on the streets with our street stall in Buchanan Street. We can't do that at this time, so we can do the next best thing, which is come to you live from our studio here in Glasgow. And we've got a lot to speak about today. There's been a lot going on this week, and a lot of things which have given us pause and given us cause to speak to you about these things. So those of you who are just coming in on Facebook and those of you on Twitter, thank you very much. We're going to be here laying down knowledge, okay? Dropping knowledge about our great British Union that we are so blessed to be part of. Because we've been going now since March 2012, and in those 8 years, we have established ourselves, a force for good, as the premier street campaigning and advocacy organisation, keeping the British Union together here in Scotland. And we're so proud of the work that we do, and we're so proud of all our wonderful people who help us, whether they help us on the street, whether they help us behind the scenes, whether they help us here in our office, whether they come out with us, or whether they simply give us moral support in other ways. Thank you so much to all of you. And we've been growing for 8 years, and we are on a trajectory to continue to grow. And we're using this time to consolidate, to improve our professionalism. Speaking of which, some very kind person was watching our last 2 broadcasts and said to us, Alistair, you need some professional lighting. So thanks to that individual, we were able to buy a couple of soft lights, which are professional studio lights, and we're just experimenting with them at the moment. We're not saying we're going to get them perfectly correct, because we're learning all the time. However, we are lucky to have one person on our team who has gone to college specifically and studied lighting. So that person is going to be helping us set up our studio equipment. Right now we've got one of the new soft lights which were delivered this week to my left, shining slightly down on me. We'll see how that looks at the end of the broadcast, if that's an improvement on past performances. So thank you to that individual for donating to us for the studio lights, which we're so grateful for. Thank you. It's all about building our professionalism. Now, as I say, we're broadcasting on Facebook and we're broadcasting on Twitter. And if you like what we're saying on Twitter, retweet this with a comment. Because if you retweet it with a comment, then that means we can then retweet you to 24,000 people. Okay? We have a big Twitter following, 24,000 people, and we want to get to 35,000 by the end of the summer. And we're definitely heading that way. So if you can retweet us, but it has to be with a comment, because that enables us to retweet you to 24,000 people. Okay? And we will do that if you retweet with a positive comment. And send us your questions as well. if you've got questions about things, please send them in. I can see them coming up on the screen here, whether on Twitter or on Facebook, and I'll do my best to answer them. I won't be answering any cheeky questions from the Scottish nationalists unless there's some kind of gain for us to do so. So if you wonder why we ignore you, it's usually because you're being ignorant. You know what I mean? So we're not going to answer those kind of questions. But if you have a genuine question, then certainly fire it in, and we'll see what we can do for you. Now, what do I want to talk about today? What's in the news? Of course, it's all this coronavirus. Now, I'm not going to talk about whether or not the correct responses of the British government are right or wrong, or whether they're correct in the first place. But I am going to talk about something that's been puzzling quite a lot of us recently, which is why does the Scottish administration here in Scotland seem to try to pretend that it's all doing its own thing? Why is it holding out in this way as if it is some kind of separate authority which is making all the decisions, when in fact it's really just in line with the British government's proposals and the British government's recommendations, whether they're right or wrong. For example, we've seen in the last week, we've seen money coming up here in Scotland, which is getting spent differently from the way that it's being spent in England. We've seen the vulnerable people's list, which went out to all the supermarkets in England 2 weeks ago. We still haven't got that sorted up here in Scotland. Well, why is that? Why is that list different? Why isn't there one central coordinating body just doing this for all of the United Kingdom? I can guarantee you that back in prior to devolution, when we just had a Secretary of State for Scotland, there would be one list of vulnerable people for all of the United Kingdom. It would go to all the different Secretaries of State, and within 24 hours it would have been actioned. What we're looking at here now with devolution is one of the disadvantages of devolution is that when you add an extra layer of bureaucracy, all that happens is that you do things slower and often less efficiently. Sometimes there may be a case for it, but on cases like this, it's not going to be any better if you add an extra layer of bureaucracy. It just means that you slow everything down. So why do we need these Scottish MSPs in order to slow things down and to do things less efficiently? It just seems kind of madness, really, when you think about it. And so that's an example of how the Scottish administration up here has really dropped the ball. And another thing that they're doing is they're trying to hold out as if they have the separate authority to do things differently in Scotland. I can assure you for a fact they're not going to do anything considerably different as far as lifting the lockdown is concerned. Imagine if Nicola Sturgeon tried to lift the lockdown before the rest of the United Kingdom. It wouldn't work. Are you going to stop cars coming into Scotland? Are you going to change the train times? It's just doesn't work. We're one country, and we need one policy, because we're not even a big country. From John O'Groats to Land's End, it's a small country. Why do you need a different lockdown policy in Glasgow compared to Manchester, or Cardiff compared to Cheltenham, which is just like a few miles up the road in England? Why would you need different policies like that? You don't, because Scotland, England, Northern Ireland and Wales together, it's a small political nation. It's not even like the USA, where New York may as well be in a different world from California. You know, we don't need different policies on matters like this. This is a case where we need one policy for the United Kingdom. And to a very large extent, we do have that. However, we have been disturbed this week by noticing strange political language coming out of the British government. And I just want to rehearse a couple of them here. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, was quoted in The Scotsman last week saying, "From our perspective, there has been incredibly close coordinated action across our public health bodies and NHS bodies to make sure we have a four-nation approach in all of this." And I read that and I thought, a four-nation approach, that's strange language. Why don't you have a one-nation approach? I thought that's what the Conservatives were all about, bringing in one nation, not four nations. Why do you need to speak about four nations when we are in fact one nation? We are one United Kingdom. And I'll get to that in a moment, because the nationalists don't believe that, but we are, and I'll explain why we are in a moment. So I thought to myself, a four-nation approach, that sounds a bit iffy, that sounds a bit iffy. And then it went on the next day in the Daily Express. UK Health Secretary Matt Hancock spoke to health ministers from different UK nations. From different UK nations. I wonder what they would be. Different UK nations? What are we talking about here? The lost nation of Atlantis or something. The Federated States of Micronesia. The Lost Kingdom of Wakanda. Why do you speak about the different UK nations? That just seems strange language, and it's not unionist language when you start talking like that. That's not how unionists talk. Unionists talk about one Britain, one UK. One UK. And further, a spokesman added, "Through this four-nation approach, we're working closely with the devolved administrations." This four-nation approach, this isn't a rugby game, mate. The four nations. What's next? France and Italy going to join, and then it'll be a Six Nations, and then people will go, "Why are France and Italy even playing here? I don't get it." So we don't like that term, the four-nation approach. We like to think of a one-nation approach, and that's the one-nation approach which we should be doing. To a large extent we are doing it, but we're also hearing that sort of strange language which we don't like, and which sets off warning bells in our heads, because that's separatist language. When you start breaking the United Kingdom down into its separate parts and pretending that each nation needs a significantly different approach on a matter like this, then you're just talking nonsense, and you're doing nothing but feeding into that separatist attitude and encouraging people like Nicola Sturgeon and her our colleagues to promote that sense of difference. That sense of difference. We don't need that sense of difference. We don't need a four-nation approach. We need a one-nation approach on a matter like this. Of all matters, we definitely need that. And so I would like to say to the British government, be aware of the language that you use, because very often your language will create the reality, because that's what happens in life. The way you talk is what eventually happens. So if you keep pushing the idea of four nations, then before you know it, people are growing up thinking, yes, our little island group here is divided into four separate different nations who have all got their own right to go and doing their own thing, and we're not really a cohesive country anymore. And so you can perpetuate division by the language that you use, and we have to be very careful not to do that. And as somebody said, Boris himself speaks of one nation. So why is Sunak and Matt Hancock and others talking about four nations? That's all very confused. We're either four nations or we're one nation as far as this response to the virus goes. So get your get your words correct. And another thing that comes from that is we often hear politicians talking about the United Kingdom as a union of nations. And I completely understand that kind of language, and it has a part to play because obviously our islands are consisting of 4 different countries. But the great thing is we're united also as one. And as we always say, we're not so much actually a union of nations. Time has created the British Isles into a nation of unions. Unions which go right back in time. Not just back to the 1801 union with Ireland, not just back to 1707 in the parliamentary union with Scotland, not just back to 1603 when the Scottish King James VI became king of the realm of Great Britain, and not just back into the 16th century when England and Wales came together, but going further back to the point where we all started to come together in our own little groups and kingdoms and social and cultural unions, going right back into the dawn of time. So all the centuries in the past have created a state today where we are essentially one nation. We're one nation of many unions. We're not just a union of nations, we're a nation of unions. And there's another phrase that they put out a lot, that we are a family of nations. Now that sounds nice, and I understand that obviously, and there's truth to that, but we also turn that around and we say that we are quite literally a nation of families. You know, we literally have brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers, grandparents, cousins, nephews and nieces based throughout the British Isles. We have family in all of these places. We're not just a family of disparate nations. We have become literally over time here in the British Isles a nation of families. And that's a wonderful thing when we think about that. We are a nation of unions and we're a nation of families. And that's the way that we like to riff upon it. That's what we like to emphasize. And by emphasizing the nation, in that sense, we're able to bring in the emotions on these matters. The nation of families. That's what we have become over time. And the nation of unions. And the Scottish nationalists will go, oh, no, Britain's not a nation. Oh, you think the UK's a nation? You don't know anything. You don't know what you're talking about. The UK is just a political state. No, the United Kingdom has all the appearances of being a nation in its own right. For example, the United Kingdom has one head of state, the Queen. It has one British Parliament for all parts of the United Kingdom. It has one political system known as representative parliamentary democracy. And people from all over our islands are elected to that parliament. And we all vote for them to be elected to that one British Parliament. We have one international boundary, which is recognised worldwide. We have one British citizenship. We have one language, which also happens to be the international diplomatic language. We have one currency. We have one passport, British passport. We have one British national anthem. We have one flag. We have one armed forces. We have one presence on international institutions all over the world. And we have British embassies worldwide. And not only that, but we also have a unified legal system to a large extent. Now, of course, Scotland and England's laws have evolved differently, and we have different legal systems. But we also do have one Supreme Court for civil cases, whether Scottish, Northern Irish, Welsh or English, and that's located, of course, in London. The Supreme Court used to be called the House of Lords. So all of these things are facts which demonstrate that the United Kingdom is one nation. It has grown over time to be one nation of unions, one nation of families. And of course, the Scottish nationalists don't want to accept that, because they know that if we argue on those terms that Britain is a nation, then it will be much harder for them to get their way, because we're defending the integrity of one nation. They want to switch the debate entirely simply to arguments over whether or not it suits Scotland's interests to be part of this wider political state. They want to make the debate as small as possible around just whether or not this is Scotland's, whether it serves Scotland's interests to be part of the UK. They don't want to get into arguing about whether the United Kingdom per se is a good thing, whether it per se has a legitimate existence and a right to exist, and whether or not it has an inherent worth in and of itself. They don't want to go down into that argument because that's a powerful argument, and it's one that many of us will stand by and defend. And so they don't want to accept that we have an object of allegiance, which is the United Kingdom. They want to basically pretend that our object of allegiance does not even exist, that it's not even a real thing. And they'll take that one step further, and they'll even say things like, there's no such thing as Britishness. The British identity isn't real. In other words, they will try to pretend that our identity does not even exist, that it's not even a real thing. And to the extent that they may accept there is such a thing, they will try to delegitimize it by dumping all over it, and dumping all over its history and so on. So the Scottish nationalists understand very well identity politics, and they know that that's key, really, when you get right down to it here. And so they want to delegitimise the idea of the United Kingdom as one nation, and they want to delegitimise the idea that the British identity even exists. And when the British political community vote as one British political community, as we did in 2016, then they want to pretend that that vote is not legitimate in Scotland. They don't want to accept that we voted as British. They don't want to accept that at all. Well, they're going to have to accept those things. They're going to have to accept those things because we're not going away. You know, we are not going away. The British identity is a real thing, and it exists in a real place. And the United Kingdom is here to stay, and so long as we have got people like yourselves who are watching, who support it, then it is definitely here to stay for another 1,000 years. And that's what we have to be thinking of, not just the short term, you know. The United Kingdom has been here for a very long time, and it's going to be here for a lot longer. Now, I've got a message just coming in here from a colleague, and I'm just going to have a quick look at what the question is. And a person is saying, how do you respond to people who say that there's no such thing as Britishness? Well, I guess I've really just answered that. You say there is most definitely a real thing, because we believe it. We feel it. Are you saying that what we feel is not real? That's, how dare you, really, at the end of the day, try to pretend that our identity does not exist as a real thing. Thank you to everybody who is watching on the Facebook camera and everybody who's watching on the live Twitter camera. Thanks very much. We're broadcasting live from the Nerve Centre of A Force for Good here in the great British city of Glasgow. But of course, we represent people throughout Scotland and indeed throughout the United Kingdom. And we've got supporters the length and breadth of the United Kingdom, because as we always say, if you're British, you're involved. That's what we said last week. If you're British, you're involved. Don't think that this is just something for these Scots up there to worry about. No, this is about the future of our United Kingdom. And a lot of people, especially maybe in England, they voted for Britain to leave the EU. And what we're trying to emphasise to everybody is that if you believe in Britain, you have to want it to stay together, because without Scotland, you wouldn't really have a rest of a United Kingdom left. What would be left, really, at the end of the day, you would have a Northern Ireland which would be increasingly isolated, and you would have an England kind of on its own, and we'd almost be back to where we were hundreds of years ago prior to the political union. So if you believe in Britain, then it's a natural thing to believe in the British Union, which is what we're standing up for and standing strong for here in Scotland. And as soon as we can get over this virus matter, as soon as that's got over with, as soon as we can get back out on the streets again, we're going to be doing that. We're going to be having our street stalls, not just in Glasgow, but wherever we can hold them. And if you're watching and if you'd like to run one of our street stalls, then contact us. And what that would involve is you coming to stand with us in Glasgow for a day. We'd show you the ropes. We'd show you what you need to do. We'd give you the literature and materials that you need, and we would help you to build up some local followers wherever you may be, and you would be able to run a street stall in your area, and we'd give you the banners and the flags and things like that. So if you would like to run a street stall anywhere in Scotland, and that's going to be particularly important in the coming months as we approach the Holyrood election in May 2021. If you'd like to run a street stall for A Force for Good, please contact us and we'll give you the training, and we'll make sure that you have the materials that you need to do that. And not only that, but if the Scottish National Party supporters start marching again, start going on their organised slouches through towns, then we will of course be there to stand up for the great British Union and for our United Kingdom, with our thin red line of supporters, our colourful red, white and blue, standing up, increasing the visibility of British symbolism. We cannot let them destroy Scotland, and that's exactly what they are doing. Yes, I agree with you, sir. I agree with you. I was born in Scotland, I live in Scotland, but by the grace of God, I am British. Fantastic sentiment, fantastic sentiment. There's a couple of people already showing interest in the idea of street stalls. Indeed, indeed. So where were we? Yes, the United Kingdom is not just a union of nations. It is primarily a nation of unions. It is not just a family of nations. It is primarily a nation of families, quite literally. And that is the understanding which inspires our work. And that is the broad story, the broad narrative, if you like, of our work. Because around that idea, around the idea of a nation of unions, around the idea of a nation of families, then you can articulate a lot of material, a lot of history, a lot of emotion, a lot of loyalty, a lot of allegiance, and a lot of hope as well, because we can emphasize the extent to which we're all in this together, and that we are stronger together. And that is being shown by this particular matter that we're involved in right now with this virus. And I'd be interested in what people thought about the extent to which this will have an impact upon the unity of the UK. Do we think that the response to the coronavirus is strengthening the United Kingdom at the end of the day, or will it, as the nationalists hope, will it in some way help their cause? An interesting philosophical question, which time will no doubt tell. But we believe it will ultimately strengthen the United Kingdom, because, as we were saying earlier, we have to have a response which is a unitary response, a one nation response, and forget all that silly language about a four-nation approach. That's a four-nation approach potentially has got four different answers, and so that's not the correct way of dealing with something in a landmass as small as the British Isles. As small as the British Isles, when there's really there's no great distances involved at all. And so how did all that four-nation approach thing come to being? Well, a lot of it depends upon the misunderstanding of devolution, which has been a misunderstanding from the very start. You know, devolution was kind of conceived in panic, and it went all back to when the Labour Party in Scotland got upset at the extent to which Margaret Thatcher and the Tories won, and they weren't becoming government. And the man at the root of all this is Robin Cook. Okay, people go, "Oh, Robin Cook, great Labour man." No. Look at what he did to the United Kingdom, and look at his nasty rhetoric back then, which was all about. He sounded exactly like the worst Scottish nationalists do today, about how Scotland had voted one way and we weren't getting the Labour government. And so he and a few of his acolytes thought that if we set up a parliament here in Scotland, we'll be able to run it forevermore, and we can have Scotland as our own little fiefdom. Well, that didn't work out, because a lot of us told him, no, if you set up a national parliament in Scotland, the only people who will benefit from that will be the Scottish national people. You know, it's all very simple. It's all very laid out for him. No, that's not going to benefit you in the long run. It might benefit you in the next election cycle for 5 years or 10 years. But you know what? It didn't even benefit from them for 10 years, because they set up the parliament in 1999, and in 2007, 8 years later, the Scottish nationalists took over. Well. Who foresaw that? We foresaw that. We warned against it, and we knew it would happen, and it happened. So it's not like it's unnatural or anything like that. It was going to happen if they went down that route. However, they could have done things which could have prevented the danger that we're now facing. And one of the things that they could have done properly was understood what devolution was in the first place. Devolution is essentially British parliamentary power devolved to a lower level. It's not setting up an equivalency between Westminster and Holyrood. It's actually it's not a horizontal relationship. It's actually a vertical relationship where you have the font of power, which is the British Parliament, and it devolves certain competencies to other British state institutions. And Holyrood is a British state institution. It is part of the British parliamentary structure, but it's never really properly been understood in that way. That's how unionists would properly conceive it. And if we had been involved in setting up devolution, we would have ensured that that would have been understood and would have been would have in fact not worked to break up the UK in the way that it seems to be doing. Because one of the huge mistakes that they made was what they decided to do was to have a reserved model of devolution. Now what that means is that everything is devolved except that which you remember to write down. And that's a very dangerous way of making devolution. The other way, the way that they should have done it, is to have a devolved model, which is that nothing is devolved except that which we write down. In other words, everything is reserved. Everything is reserved except that which we actually write down. And that's called a devolved powers model. That's the way that you control devolution, because you give the power out depending upon what you write it down. Yeah, dog licensing, yes. Car plate registration, no. Cleaning chimneys, yes. That sort of thing. You can control it if you have a devolved model where everything is considered reserved except that which you specifically write down. But they didn't go with that sensible way of looking at it. What they did was they said everything is devolved except that which we remember to write down. And what that means is that you essentially just let a gas loose. And if you've said everything is devolved, then the devolved assemblies naturally just increase out like a gas into every nook and cranny that they can, claiming powers all over the place because it's not specifically written down. I mean, you even look at this emergency legislation, which they produce up here in Scotland. Now, I don't understand how they're getting away with that, because emergency powers are meant to be reserved. They're written down as reserved. So I know it's because they've found some loophole in this so-called devolutionary settlement, which simply allows them to expand into areas. And they did this as soon as they were elected in 2007. Tell you a little story, right? Prior to the SNP winning Holyrood in 2007, Holyrood had it was called the Scottish Executive for a start. Get to that in a minute. But they had a logo. And you go back onto the internet and you look at the Scottish Executive logo. Now, fair play to the Labour government at the time. It was the Scottish coat of arms. Now, that's a really nice Scottish and British form of symbolism, showing in and of itself that Holyrood has a relationship with the wider British political, historical culture. Fantastic. Nobody was complaining about that, except Alex Salmond. Scrubbed that off all of the stationery, scrubbed it off all the buildings, and replaced it with the new Scottish logo, which is a saltire. How original. How original. So everything was rebranded. Take throw out the nice Scottish coat of arms, stick a saltire up there. That's the new Scottish logo, which has been ever since. And he did that because he could. It wasn't written down that that was a reserved power. So it was just one of these things that was considered to be devolved. So he could do that. Another thing which he did was he changed the name Scottish Executive to Scottish Government. And that really, really was the beginning of our present day confusion. And again, he did that because he could. Nowhere was it written down that you can't change the name. So he thought, well, everything's devolved, so I can change the name, which he did. But by doing so, he created in many people's minds an equivalency between the British government and the Scottish government, so-called, when in fact there is, in practice, there is no equivalency. The Scottish government is devolved from the British government. It does not have the powers of a government. It does not have the independent powers of a government. That's why it doesn't get its way all the time, because it's not an independent government. It's more properly termed an executive, which in itself suggests that there is a form of hierarchical relationship there, that it's not an equivalency. However, the government, the Labour government at the time in 2007, did not have the moral stamina or the strength or the will to say, whoa, no, you can't call yourself that. They didn't go there. So he just got his way. He got his way through sheer force of doing what he wanted. And then to make matters worse, a horrible commission called the Calman Commission, which was just made up of federalists, made up of people who wanted to mess up the UK and wanted it to go down different paths. They were commissioned to find ways to mess up the UK, and they came up with a report, and the report officially said that we should change it now officially from executive to government. And then when Cameron and Clegg were elected as in the Tory Lib Dem coalition, they passed the 2012 Scotland Act, which unfortunately put all that into law. Again, showing that they had no clue about what they were really doing. So now we're all compelled to pretend, because it is a pretense, we're all compelled to pretend that the Scottish so-called government is on some kind of equivalency with the British national government, which it's not. It's not on such an equivalency at all. However, because that's the image that is given, because those are the words that are used, there are people growing up today in Scotland who genuinely do believe that we've got a Scottish government that's equivalent to the British government. So why aren't we being treated equally? They don't see it within the context of the Union. They just see it as some kind of Scottish government being somehow restrained by the British government, when in fact the relationship is, the actual political relationship is, the British government's in charge, because we're still one united kingdom. And a lot more people would support devolution if it was run in that sort of unionist way, where it was a genuine understanding that it's a British government and that these are devolved institutions that don't have the power. And there's reasons why they don't have the power. However, once you have devolved something like that, and once a virulent revolutionary group like the SNP take the reign of control, then they are going to utilise words and actions and promote it in a way that makes it look like they are in fact equivalent and that they're being held down when they're not at all. So if we were a Prime Minister, the first thing we would do is we would say, you cannot use that term Scottish government, because you're not a government. You don't have the powers of an independent state, and nor should you have, because we're one United Kingdom unitary state. We would also talk much more about a one nation approach, and we wouldn't go down this whole silly four nations approach. Who's impressed by that? Who's impressed by that? And we would talk much more about our nation of families and our nation of unions. We wouldn't talk about the union in anything other than that unitary manner. And somebody coming in here with a point. Yeah. So we are broadcasting live from the great British city of Glasgow. We're broadcasting out to everybody through the length and breadth of our United Kingdom and indeed the world. Thank you for viewing. We've a lot of people here watching on Facebook and also on the Twitter camera. And if you can retweet this, please do so with a comment. If you do it with a comment, that means we can then retweet your tweet to 24,000 people. That's a lot of people. 24,000 people. I mean, we are by far the biggest pro-UK organisation on Twitter. And we have an agenda to actually get past even the journalists in order that we can be the biggest. And we have a budget for that as well, and we have somebody who is a full-time committed on Twitter, producing fantastic content, reaching out to new followers every day. We thank that person for their work. They do a great job. We also remember we have an Instagram page, UK A Force for Good, which is over 2,600 people now on our Instagram page, which again is way above anybody else in this field, and it's very colourful. You go on, you're just in red, white and blues emblazoned all over it. We post on that several times a day. Thank you very much. There's a good point somebody's made there. Scottish journalists are so afraid of the SNP and retaliation, and that is a fact. That's a fact. And let me just give you a little pointer about that. When Nicola Sturgeon came to have her rally in George Square back in November last year, we had some fantastic people turn out. We had a lot of people, and we had a lot of flags, and at least a couple of hundred people in George Square. The police kept us back at the end of the square, while the Scottish National Party were down at the other end of the square, and the police shut off the entire square, and they kept the two sides apart, and it was all good, and it was all fun, and it was all good natured. However, a really good story ran in the Daily Express website about how Nicola Sturgeon had been embarrassed with all of these Union Jack flags, which were right in her face. For 48 hours, that was the top story on the Scottish Daily Express's website, until a particular SNP MSP started putting it about that the pictures were photoshopped. Well, of course they weren't photoshopped. Who's going to photoshop them? They were genuine pictures. The Express came to us and said, this MSP is saying that these are not real pictures. Can we see the real pictures? We sent them the real pictures, but nevertheless, they took the story down. They took the story down even though it was trending for 48 hours, #1 on the Scottish Daily Express website. And they took it down because they were pressured into doing it by, most likely, allegedly, by this particular Scottish National Party person. Now, they do not like it up them, as they say. They don't like it. They don't like to see the flag, the Union Jack flag. They want basically to control the Scottish media as much as possible, and the media are scared of them because at the end of the day, the SNP is very well connected, and who knows, the sorts of things that it could do financially if you don't toe the line. That's especially so, unfortunately, in Scotland, where the printed press is struggling, and must be struggling during this particular weather, because, you know, you go into the supermarket now, they don't even let you look through the newspapers. We usually go into the supermarket every day, look through the newspapers, buy the ones we want. Now they're not letting you touch the newspapers because of the so-called virus. So I mean, even that's losing sales for newspapers. So I don't know how they're going to get out of this in one piece, if they'll get out of it alive, as Hank Williams would say. So we shall see. We shall see. But back to my point there. Yeah, the SNP do not like alternative media dropping knowledge like we're doing here today on the internet. And thank goodness for the internet, which allows us to get out and get our message across, and get our pro-UK unionist message across, because at the end of the day, we are one nation. And yeah, we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube. What we'll do with this broadcast is we will upload it onto YouTube for posterity, so you'll be able to watch it there. We also rip the audio from this and we put it up on various podcast pages, and that's what I wanted to tell you. We are now on the 5 podcast platforms. Go to aforceforgood/podcast. We're also on Spotify. Search for A Force for Good podcast page. We are also on Spreaker, Spreaker. That's a podcast page. We're also on there. We're also on Podchaser. We're also on Deezer. And over time, we're going to have an awful lot of podcasts building up on there. So you just go on to Spotify, Podchaser, Deezer, or Spreaker, and search for A Force for Good podcast page, and you'll get the audio from these clips. And some people prefer that. They like to download it and listen to it later. We'll put this up, as I say, on our YouTube channel also. So if you can give us a like or a share or a comment or a question on our Facebook page here, please do so. Good stuff. Keep spreading the message via all mediums. Thank you, ma'am. That's good stuff. Thanks for the comments. Send us in a question. We take questions from Scottish nationalists, provided they're not ignorant and cheeky, okay? If you're ignorant or cheeky, we're not listening to you if you're a Scottish nationalist. So do your best, try to formulate a coherent sentence, and if you can manage that, then we will consider whether or not we will respond to you. Britain is still great and always will be great, says Mr. Reid. I am a Scot, lived in England, worked in Wales, have Irish grandparents, now living back in Scotland, so I know that all parts of the UK get on well. Sounds to me like you're 100% British, sir. Thanks. That's the sort of thing. I'm a Scot living in Cornwall. Absolutely. You are what we were talking about. You are part of our nation of families. Our nation of families. Brilliant, says a chat there. Thank you, sir. Can we maximise a better together message coming from this pandemic? Yes. I think that we definitely can. We definitely can. And one of the things that the pandemic shows, whatever one may think of the response, whether you think the response is right or wrong, the question is an awful lot of money is going to have to come from somewhere in order to get us out of this. And that can only come from the British Treasury. Okay, it's only the combined efforts of Scotland, England, Northern Ireland and Wales together, united in one monetary union, that can pull us all through. There's no way one particular part of this could do it on its own. And so economically, financially, that's something that has been proven. I'm listening in Spain, proud to be British. Fantastic, isn't that wonderful? We're broadcasting here and somebody sitting in Spain can see that. Well, I hope the weather's nice there in Spain, and I hope the lockdown in Spain isn't too troublesome. I hope you get some nice weather to go along with it. Yeah, yes, united we have been better together. Absolutely, of course. And I think more people are understanding that now. Of course, the Scottish nationalists will come up with all sorts of things. You know, when they get given money, they just say, well, it's what we were owed anyway. And that's something with the Scottish nationalist mentality, is it doesn't matter what you give them. You could give them £1 zillion, or you could give them all the powers that they wanted, and they would still take it without thanks. They'd bank it, and then they'd pretend that they never received it. And that's what they do with all of these things. They take what they're given without thanks, they bank it, then pretend that they never received it. And we noticed that last year with the so-called vow, where they basically got everything they wanted via the 2016 Scotland Act, and yet still they pretend that nothing was given to them, when in fact an awful lot was given to them, including giving them the power to change the franchise. That's a massive power, which they of course immediately abused. We told the British government, don't give them power over the franchise, whatever you do. But of course the British government, oh, power over the franchise, yeah, you can have that. Oh goodness me, fighting an uphill battle with these twits in Westminster who don't understand how tenuously, in some cases, the bonds are that they can snap if they're not careful. Financial genius John Swinney told us that Scotland is on the cusp of an oil boom. Yes, he did indeed, and he got that slightly wrong. Why don't you... yeah, okay. I don't know if we would do that, but it's an interesting point about going there. So, where were we? Yes, one nation, the United Kingdom, is the true progressive alliance, because we are stronger together. And in the last few moments, I'm just going to run through something that I wanted to say. It doesn't matter whether you're listening in Aberdeen, and it doesn't matter whether you're from Aberystwyth. It doesn't matter whether you live in Belfast or whether you live in Birmingham. As far as unionists are concerned, we don't care whether you're in Carlisle or whether you're in Carstairs, whether you live in Dundee or whether you live in Donaghadee, because we stand as one nation together, one nation of unions and one nation of families. And we don't care if you're in Easterhouse or if you're in Eastbourne. We don't care if you're in Falkirk or Falmouth. We don't care if you're in the great British city of Glasgow, as we are today, or whether you're in Glastonbury, whether you are in Hampden or whether you're in Hammersmith, whether you're in Inverness or Ipswich, whether you're in Jaywick in Essex or whether you are in Johnston. We are one people. We're one United Kingdom. We are one nation of unions, one nation of families. Whether you're in Kilmarnock or whether you're in Kidderminster, whether you're in Lenzie or whether you are in London, we're one people from A to Z, one people from A to Z. Whether we are in Maryhill or whether we are in Manchester, whether we are in New Milnes or Newton Abbey, whether we are in Oban or Omagh, we're one people together, united within Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and we stand against division and against separation. And we don't care, as unionists, if you're in Pennycook or whether you're in Pontypridd or whether you're in Penzance, whether you're in Queenslie or Quarrington, Ravenscraig or Reading, Stromness or Strabane. One nation of unions, one nation of families, one United Kingdom, which will not be divided. E pluribus unum. Whether you're in Tobermory, whether you're in Twickenham, we don't care, because we're unionists. We're all part of the one nation, from Ullapool to Ulverston, and we will not be divided. Whether we're in Vaux, in Shetland, or whether we're standing under the clock in Victoria Station in London, whether we're in Waterside in Ayrshire, or whether we're in Weston-super-Mare or Warrington or Wigan or Weston-super-Mare or Welshpool. We're standing under one banner, which is the British banner. And when it comes to the X, we put that in the box to stand for solidarity, not for separation. Whether you are in Yarrow Water in Selkirk, or whether you're in Yarmouth on the Isle of Wight, and whether you're in Zetland Road here in the great British city of Glasgow, or Zetland Street in London. From A to Z, we are one United Kingdom. Ladies and gentlemen, let me end there. Let me thank you for watching today. Let me remind you to check out our Instagram, our YouTube, our Facebook, our Twitter. If you can share any of this, please do so. Please check out our website, aforceforgood.uk. And if you get value from this, please check out aforceforgood.uk/donate to. That's donate numeral 2, because we need your support at this time to keep going and to keep standing up for the United Kingdom. And also check out our legacy site, which has been up since 2012, which we don't post on anymore, but which has huge value on that as well. That's aforceforgood.org.uk. But until then, thank you so much for your comments. Please come to Motherwell. We need you all, and then so many of us that will join you. Well, okay, we'll hold you to that, and we'll be in Motherwell with our street stall if we can get out as soon as we can get out. But keep reminding us about that, Sir Lee, and we'll come to Motherwell, and we'll ask you for the best place to stand in Motherwell, where you think would be best for us to get the most traffic, the most feet. Thank you, Alistair McConaughey. Thank you, Angus. Okay, folks, we're going to say good afternoon. Have a lovely weekend. It's the Queen's birthday on the 21st of April. So God save the Queen, and God bless the United Kingdom. Take care, folks.